Sabine Richter never imagined that accepting an invitation to a wedding in Brazil would change her life forever. At 52, this retired nurse from Dusseldorf had devoted 3 decades to caring for others, sacrificing her own dreams of traveling the world. After her divorce was finalized 2 years ago, she finally felt free to explore the destinations she had only ever seen in travel magazines. "I finally had the chance to live for myself." These were the words Sabine repeated to her friends whenever she talked about her new plans. After 25 years of marriage to Klaus, a strict accountant who considered international travel a waste of money, she was determined to enjoy her newfound freedom. The divorce had been bitter but fair. She kept the house in Oberkassel and a considerable amount of the shared retirement fund. The invitation came through Isabella, a 28-year-old Brazilian woman whom Sabine had met 3 months earlier in a Facebook group called German Women Discovering Brazil. Isabella introduced herself as a tour coordinator in Rio de Janeiro, fluent in German and specializing in showing authentic Brazil to European visitors. Her photos showed a beautiful young woman, always smiling, posing alongside satisfied tourists in front of Christ the Redeemer and Copacabana Beach. "Minha querida Sabine," Isabella wrote in near-perfect German, "I invite you to something very special." The invitation was tempting: her cousin Rafael's wedding in Salvador, Bahia, a traditional 3-day Brazilian celebration that tourists rarely have the opportunity to witness. "You will experience true Brazilian culture," Isabella promised, assuring Sabine that she would be treated like family. What made the offer irresistible were the carefully planned details. Isabella had researched Sabine's social media profile. She knew of her interest in Latin culture, her passion for photography, and her recent separation. "After everything you've been through, you deserve a magical trip," she wrote in one of the many private messages they exchanged. Sabine, who had casually mentioned in a post that she felt lost after her divorce, found an attentive listener in Isabella. The young Brazilian always responded quickly, offering words of encouragement and sharing stories about how other German women had found new life after visiting Brazil. "Brazil heals broken hearts," Isabella would say with a poetry that touched Sabine deeply. The conversations quickly evolved from tourism to personal confidences. Isabella seemed genuinely interested in Sabine's life, asking about her career as a nurse, her adult children who lived in other cities, and especially her financial situation after the divorce. "You are a strong woman," she constantly praised. "You deserve all the good things in life." When Isabella finally made the official invitation to the wedding, she included all the details that a careful person like Sabine would need. The flight would be partially subsidized by the family, a tradition, she explained. She would stay at the family home in Salvador, an authentic experience that no hotel could offer. "You will be like my German sister," Isabella promised. Sabine carefully researched trips to Brazil, read forums by German women who had visited the country, and even consulted her doctor about necessary vaccinations. Everything seemed legitimate. Isabella had sent photos of the family, the house where Sabine would be staying, and even a video of the bride showing the wedding preparations. Sabine's friends had mixed opinions. Petra, her best friend of 20 years, thought the trip was adventurous but exciting. Ingrid, always more cautious, asked uncomfortable questions. "How well do you know this, Isabella?" But Sabine was determined. "I'm 52, not 25, she argued. "I can take care of myself." What Sabine didn't know was that Isabella had been studying her profile thoroughly for weeks. The young Brazilian woman knew exactly where Sabine worked, knew the names of her children Thomas and Lisa, knew about the inheritance left by her mother 2 years earlier, and most importantly, had identified all the signs of emotional vulnerability she looked for in her potential victims. Isabella was also not who she claimed to be. Her real name was Mariana Silva, 31, and she was part of an organized network that had perfected the process of identifying, attracting, and exploiting European women in emotionally vulnerable situations. The Facebook group was a hunting tool run by 5 people who took turns creating fake profiles and establishing relationships with potential targets. The family that appeared in the photos was real, but it was not Isabella's family. The images had been collected from the social media profiles of people who did not even know their photos were being used in criminal schemes. The wedding in Salvador did exist, but it was not the intimate family event that had been promised to Sabine. 3 days before the trip, Isabella sent an urgent message. "Sabine, minha querida, there's been a small change of plans due to family issues." She explained the wedding had been moved to a smaller town called Cachoeira, about 120 kilometers inland from Salvador. "It will be even more authentic," she assured her. "Fewer tourists, more tradition." Sabine, with her bags already packed and her documents organized, saw no problem with the change. In fact, the prospect of an even more authentic experience thrilled her. She photographed her passport and sent it via WhatsApp to Thomas, her son, with the message, "Your mother is finally taking her dream trip." On the morning of the flight, April 15th, Sabine woke up at 4 a.m. She put on her most comfortable clothes for the 12-hour trip to Rio de Janeiro. Dark jeans, a light blue cotton blouse, and a comfortable cardigan. At Düsseldorf Airport, she took a selfie in the departure area and posted it on Facebook. "Finally, Brazil, here I come." What Sabine couldn't have imagined was that this photo would be one of the last images of her smiling that her friends and family would see for the next 30 days, and that Isabella, at that very moment, was sending a message to her accomplices, "A alma está chegando hoje. Tudo pronto." The German is arriving today. Everything is ready. Lufthansa flight LH500 landed at Rio de Janeiro's Galeão International Airport at 9:15 p.m. local time, just 30 minutes late. Sabine Richter looked out the window at the spectacular coastline and mountains, feeling a mixture of anxiety and excitement. During the flight, she had meticulously read her Lonely Planet travel guide and reviewed the basic Portuguese phrases she had jotted down on her cell phone. Obrigada, thank you. Hola, hello. Neo falo português, I don't speak Portuguese. In the last 3 days before the trip, she had exchanged constant messages with Isabella, who seemed even more excited than she was. Mal passo esperar para ti conhecer minha irmã alma. I can't wait to meet you, my German sister, she had written the day before. The plan was simple. Isabella would meet her at the exit of the international arrivals area holding a sign with the name, Sabine Richter Bem-vinda ao Brasil, and then they would take a connecting flight to Salvador the next morning, spending the first night in Rio. After passing through immigration and customs without any problems, the Brazilian official even smiled when he saw her tourist visa. Sabine emerged in the arrivals area looking for Isabella. The crowd was intense, with dozens of people holding signs in Portuguese, English, and other languages she couldn't identify. Taxi drivers constantly approached her. "Taxi, senora? Where are you going?" After 20 minutes of searching, she began to worry. She tried to call Isabella, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent messages on WhatsApp. "Isabella, I'm here. Where are you?" The messages showed only one check mark, indicating that they had not been delivered. That's when a friendly-looking young man, around 25 years old, approached her speaking German with a strong Portuguese accent. "Excuse me, are you Sabine?" He introduced himself as Lucas, Isabella's cousin. "Isabella had to rush to the hospital," he explained with a worried expression. "Her mother got sick. She sent me to pick you up." "Is she very ill?" Sabine asked, genuinely concerned. Lucas shook his head sadly. "Very ill, yes. But Isabella said the wedding is still on. The family is waiting for you in Cachoeira." The story made sense. And Lucas seemed to know details about her that only Isabella could have shared. He mentioned that she was a retired nurse from Düsseldorf, that she had recently divorced, and even knew that she loved photography. "Isabella tells me everything about her German sister," he said with a warm smile. Lucas explained that they would drive directly to Cachoeira, bypassing Salvador entirely. "The trip would take about 6 hours, but I know some interesting stops along the way. You will see the real Brazil," he promised, echoing Isabella's words. Lucas's car was a relatively new black SUV with air conditioning that worked well, a relief in the humid April heat of Rio. He put Sabine's luggage in the trunk and insisted that she sit in the front seat to get a better view of the landscape. "You are our guest," he said constantly. "We treat German guests like queens." During the first 2 hours of the trip, Lucas was the perfect tour guide. He pointed out landmarks, explained Brazilian traditions, and even stopped at smaller scenic spots so Sabine could take pictures. He photographed her in front of a colonial church and even taught her a few words in Portuguese. "You learn fast," he praised when she managed to pronounce beautiful. What caught Sabine's attention were the personal questions Lucas asked, always in a natural way during conversations. He wanted to know about her retirement. How much do retired German nurses earn? About her house in Düsseldorf. Is it big, valuable? And especially about her children. Do they visit you often? Do they know where you are? When they stopped for dinner at a small restaurant in a town whose name Sabine couldn't remember, Lucas insisted on paying for everything. "You are our guest," he repeated, but then casually asked, "Did you bring money for gifts for the family? German women love to give gifts, don't they?" Sabine mentioned that she had brought €800 in cash for gifts and expenses, in addition to credit cards for emergencies. It was during dinner that Sabine began to notice small inconsistencies. Lucas sometimes got confused about details of Isabella's mother's illness. First, he said she was in the hospital with heart problems. Then he mentioned a fall at home. When Sabine asked which hospital, Lucas hesitated before answering Hospital São Lucas. After dinner, when they returned to the car, Sabine noticed that Lucas was speaking quickly on the phone in Portuguese, his voice tense and urgent. When she asked if it was about Isabella's mother, he just nodded and changed the subject. The second half of the trip was different. Lucas was quieter, answering questions with monosyllables. The car took side roads that were not on the map Sabine had studied. When she questioned it, Lucas explained that it was a shortcut to avoid Salvador traffic. Around 3 a.m., they arrived at what Lucas said was Cachoeira, but the town did not look like the photos Isabella had sent. There were no colonial buildings as promised, only simple houses on poorly lit streets. Cachoeira is bigger than you think, Lucas explained. This is the newer part of town. The house where they stopped was a simple two-story building with concrete walls painted a faded yellow. At the gate, two women were waiting for them. Lucas introduced them as Tia Maria and Tia Rosa, but they barely looked at Sabine and spoke only Portuguese to each other. "Where is Isabella?" asked Sabine, growing increasingly uncomfortable. "She'll come tomorrow morning," replied Lucas. "Now you need to rest. It's been a long journey." The room they showed her was on the second floor, a small space with a simple bed, an old wardrobe and a window with metal bars. "For your safety," Lucas explained when Sabine questioned the bars. "It's not always safe here at night." When Lucas said goodbye, he told her he would return in the morning with Isabella. "Sleep well, Sabine. Tomorrow the real adventure begins." But something in his tone of voice sounded more threatening than friendly. Alone in the room, Sabine tried again to call Isabella, but there was no cell phone signal. The Wi-Fi that Lucas had promised didn't work. She heard the two women talking in Portuguese downstairs, their voices occasionally rising as if they were arguing. Around 3 a.m., they arrived at what Lucas said was Cachoeira, but the town did not look like the photos Isabella had sent. There were no colonial buildings as promised, only simple houses on poorly lit streets. "Cachoeira is bigger than you think," Lucas explained. "This is the newer part of town." The house where they stopped was a simple two-story building with concrete walls painted a faded yellow. At the gate, two women were waiting for them. Lucas introduced them as Tia Maria and Tia Rosa, but they barely looked at Sabine and spoke only Portuguese to each other. "Where is Isabella?" asked Sabine, growing increasingly uncomfortable. "She'll come tomorrow morning," replied Lucas. "Now you need to rest. It's been a long journey." The room they showed her was on the second floor, a small space with a simple bed, an old wardrobe and a window with metal bars. "For your safety," Lucas explained when Sabine questioned the bars. "It's not always safe here at night." When Lucas said goodbye, he told her he would return in the morning with Isabella. "Sleep well, Sabine. Tomorrow the real adventure begins." But something in his tone of voice sounded more threatening than friendly. Alone in the room, Sabine tried again to call Isabella, but there was no cell phone signal. The Wi-Fi that Lucas had promised didn't work. She heard the two women talking in Portuguese downstairs, their voices occasionally rising as if they were arguing. Around 4 a.m., Sabine heard the front door slam shut, followed by the sound of a car driving away. When she looked out the barred window, she saw Lucas driving toward the main road. The lights in the house went out, and she realized she was alone with two strangers who didn't speak German, in a place she couldn't locate on a map, with no communication with the outside world. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, feeling the first chill of real fear. For the first time since arriving in Brazil, Sabine began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Sabine Richter woke up on her third day in Brazil with the disturbing feeling that something was fundamentally wrong. She had slept poorly during the night, waking up several times to strange noises, footsteps in the hallway, voices whispering in Portuguese, and the sound of motorcycles arriving and departing. Each time she tried to listen more closely, silence returned, making her wonder if she was being paranoid. The morning brought more confusion rather than answers. Tia Maria, one of the women who had welcomed her the night before, brought her strong coffee and pão de queijo for breakfast. When Sabine asked, "Where is Isabella?" in basic German mixed with gestures, Maria just shook her head and repeated words in Portuguese that she didn't understand. Around 10 a.m. Lucas finally appeared, but not with Isabella. His demeanor was noticeably different from the day before, less warm, more formal. "Isabella is still dealing with family matters," he explained quickly, avoiding direct eye contact. "Her mother is very, very sick. She may not make it." Sabine expressed her condolences and offered her help. As a nurse, perhaps she could help in some way. Lucas seemed to consider for a moment, then shook his head. You are a tourist, not a doctor. It's different here. Most unsettling were the constant changes in plans. The wedding, Lucas now said, had been postponed for 3 days due to the family emergency. But you stay here, he insisted. The family wants to meet you. It would be rude to leave. When Sabine suggested that it might be better to return to Rio and wait in a hotel until the situation was resolved, Lucas became visibly agitated. No, that would be a great insult to the family. They have prepared so much for your visit. To distract her, Lucas offered a tour of the area. But when they left, Sabine realized they were not in Cachoeira as he had claimed. She asked several people on the street in basic English what the name of the town was. The answers confused her even more. Some said Santo Antonio, others just shook their heads, not understanding. During the sightseeing tour, Lucas took her to some minor historical sites, but always in a hurry, not allowing her to talk much with other people, especially other tourists. When she tried to ask a group of European tourists for information at a colonial church, Lucas quickly intervened, saying they were untrustworthy people. It was at this point that Sabine began to notice a disturbing pattern. Lucas always knew where she was. When she tried to go to the bathroom alone in a cafe, he showed up minutes later looking for her. When she said she wanted to buy postcards in a store, he insisted on accompanying her and staying by her side throughout the transaction. Lucas's questions also became more intrusive and specific. He wanted to know exact numbers, how much money she had brought with her, what her credit card limits were, how much her house in Dusseldorf was worth. Isabella wants to know, he explained. She's planning a surprise for you. When Sabine mentioned that she wanted to call her children to tell them about the trip, Lucas said that the local telephone system was having problems. It will work again tomorrow, he promised. But when she tried to use her cell phone discreetly, she discovered that not only was there no signal, but the battery was running out quickly, and Lucas had forgotten to bring the charger he had promised. Back at the house in the late afternoon, Sabine noticed more inconsistencies. The two women, who were supposedly Isabella's aunts, treated Lucas with a formality that did not fit with a family relationship. They addressed him as Señor Lucas, a term of respect that relatives rarely use among themselves. Even more disturbing, during dinner, when she thought no one was paying attention, Sabine heard one of the women refer to her in Portuguese as a alma rica, the rich German. She had learned these basic words in her preparatory course for the trip and realized that she was not being treated as a guest of honor, but as something very different. That night, Sabine decided to test the waters. She told Lucas that she was feeling ill and needed to go to the hospital. His reaction was revealing. Instead of showing concern, he seemed irritated and nervous. German women are always sick, he muttered, then said that there were no good hospitals in the area and that she would feel better after a good night's sleep. When she insisted that she needed medical attention, Lucas became more direct. You're not going anywhere until Isabella arrives. It was the first time he had used a tone that brooked no argument. Alone in her room again, Sabine began to connect the disturbing dots. The wedding that had brought her there seemed not to exist. Isabella, who had been her only source of information about the entire trip, remained mysteriously absent. Lucas knew intimate details about her financial life that could only have come from prior investigation. And now she was clearly being prevented from leaving. She tried to remember exactly what she had shared with Isabella during their weeks of online conversation. With horror, she realized that she had mentioned not only her financial resources, but also details about her routine in Dusseldorf, the fact that her children lived far away and rarely visited her, and especially that no one expected to hear from her during the first week of her trip. I'm not here as a guest, she whispered to herself in the dark. I'm here as what? The word she didn't want to admit was clear in her mind, prisoner. Around 2 a.m. she heard voices downstairs. Not just the two women and Lucas, but other male voices she didn't recognize. They spoke in Portuguese, but occasionally she heard words in English: money, passport, Germany. Her passport. With panic, she realized that Lucas had kept it for safety on the first day, and she hadn't thought to ask for it back. Without her passport, she was effectively trapped in the country. The reality of her situation began to crystallize. She was not in Brazil as a tourist invited to a wedding. She was there as the victim of an elaborate scheme, and the people around her were not her hosts but her captors. The terrible question that kept her awake for the rest of the night was, what exactly did they plan to do with her? The fourth day in Brazil brought a revelation that would forever change Sabine Richter's understanding of her situation. She woke up early around 5:30 a.m., to the sound of a heated argument downstairs. Male voices spoke in Portuguese in a clearly irritated tone, and she could distinguish Lucas's voice among them. Curiously, one of the voices spoke in broken German, and Sabine was able to catch a few phrases. "She's too old. This is going to cause problems. Not what was promised." Around 8 a.m., Lucas came up to her room with a more serious expression than on previous days. "Sabine," he said without his usual pleasantries. "We need to talk." For the first time, he sat down in the only chair in the room, assuming a posture that indicated a long and serious conversation. "Isabella isn't coming today," he began. And when Sabine was about to protest, he raised his hand to silence her. "Isabella doesn't exist," he continued in careful German. "I am Isabella. I was the one who wrote to you." The initial shock gave way to confusion. What did he mean? He was Isabella? Lucas explained patiently. He had created Isabella's profile, used photos of a cousin who lived in Sao Paulo, and spent months chatting with German women in Facebook groups. "You weren't the first," he said without apparent emotion. "And you won't be the last." "What? What do you want from me?" Sabine managed to ask, her voice trembling. Lucas sighed as if the question were irrelevant. "At first, we just wanted your money and banking information," he explained. "German women always have good credit, good bank accounts. But then..." He paused. "Then we realized you could be worth more in other ways." "What other ways?" Sabine's voice was barely a whisper. "There are organizations here," Lucas continued. "They need people with European passports, people who can move money across borders, people who can be convinced to participate in certain business arrangements." The horror of what Lucas was implying hit Sabine like a physical punch. "You want to force me into criminal activity?" "Force is a nasty word," Lucas replied calmly. "Think of it as a partnership. You help us, we help you. You'll make money, we'll make money. Everyone wins." "And if I refuse?" Lucas's expression hardened. "That's not really an option, Sabine. You're in Brazil illegally now, your visa has been reported stolen. You have no documents, no money, and no one knows where you are. Your cooperation would make things much easier for everyone." Sabine stood up abruptly, feeling nauseous. "I want to go home right now." "That's no longer possible, Sabine," Lucas replied, his voice taking on a harder tone. "You're not going anywhere." "I have rights. I'm a German citizen." "Your rights don't matter here," Lucas replied coldly. "And besides, no one knows where you are. Your children think you're on vacation. Your friends aren't expecting to hear from you for weeks." It was true. Sabine had told everyone she would be offline for at least a week to really experience the local culture. No one would expect to hear from her until the end of the following week at the earliest. Lucas stood up and walked to the window. "Someone is coming to see you this afternoon," he announced. "His name is Eduardo. He runs operations in this region. He'll explain exactly what we need from you." "And if I say no?" Lucas turned to face her directly. For the first time, she saw something cold and calculating in his eyes. "Then things become very difficult for you, Sabine. Very difficult indeed. Do you understand?" After Lucas left, locking the door behind him, Sabine sat on the bed, trembling. Everything was clear now. She had been lured into a sophisticated financial crime network that specifically targeted vulnerable Europeans with good credit and clean passports. The psychological profile that Isabella, Lucas, had built of her was perfect. Divorced, lonely, no close family ties, financially stable, and desperate for a new life. She was exactly the type of person who could be manipulated into becoming a money mule or worse. She remembered the seemingly innocent questions Isabella had asked her over the months, about her loneliness, how often she was in touch with her children, her financial resources, her banking information, her travel plans. Each answer had been carefully catalogued and analyzed. Around noon, the two women brought her different clothes, more formal business attire, and even insisted she style her hair differently. When Sabine refused to cooperate, Tia Maria made it clear through gestures and a few harsh words in Portuguese that this was not a suggestion. At 3 p.m. she heard a car pulling up. Male voices chatted downstairs, then footsteps climbing the stairs. When the door opened, Lucas entered, accompanied by a man in his late 40s, well-dressed in an expensive suit, with graying hair and an expression that assessed Sabine as if she were a business asset. "This is Sabine," Lucas said in Portuguese, then addressed her in German. "This is Senor Eduardo." Eduardo approached, examining her with experienced eyes. He spoke surprisingly fluent German. "You are older than I expected," he said bluntly. "But mature European women can be very useful. They look trustworthy." He walked around her as if inspecting a product. Are you healthy? Do you have any serious medical conditions? Sabine was paralyzed by shock and fear. Eduardo interpreted her silence as compliance. Good. Silent is good. You'll learn when to talk and when not to. He turned to Lucas. She has clean credit? Excellent credit history, Lucas confirmed. No criminal record, good banking relationships in Germany. Perfect. Eduardo turned back to Sabine. Listen, Frau Sabine, this is very simple. You will help us move money. You will open accounts, you will make transactions, you will sign documents. In exchange, you stay alive and eventually, maybe, you go home. I want to go home now, Sabine finally managed to whisper. Eduardo laughed coldly. Germany is far away and you have no documents. Here you have a chance to be useful. Why would you want to go back to being alone and forgotten? The coldness with which he reduced her entire life to nothing was devastating to Sabine. How much can she handle? Eduardo asked Lucas in English. Maybe 200,000 to 300,000 euros initially, Lucas replied in the same language. If she cooperates. Good. I'll send the paperwork tomorrow. Eduardo turned to Sabine one last time. I'll be back in 2 days. You'll sign what I bring you. You'll smile. You'll do exactly what I tell you to do. Understand? After he left, Lucas remained in the room. You're lucky, he said. Eduardo usually doesn't give people chances. You'll be fine if you cooperate. How can you do this? Sabine asked, tears finally streaming down her face. I'm a human being, not a tool. You were already nothing in Germany, Lucas replied emotionlessly. Divorced, lonely, forgotten by your children. Here, at least you serve a purpose. My children will look for me. Will they? Lucas tilted his head. When was the last time you spoke to Thomas? 3 weeks ago. And Lisa? A month ago. He knew the intimate details of her life better than she realized. They'll think you're enjoying your Brazilian adventure. The painful truth of Lucas's words hit Sabine hard. Her adult children did have their own busy lives, careers, relationships. They really wouldn't expect frequent contact during her adventurous vacation. Why me? She asked. You were perfect, Lucas explained almost proudly. Vulnerable but not destitute, lonely but not desperate. Old enough to be invisible, young enough to be useful. Good credit, clean record, emotional need. You checked every box. He had studied psychology to find ideal victims. How many others? You're the 12th European this year, Lucas admitted. But the others were more cooperative. Most of them are working for us now, moving money, opening accounts. Some even stay in Brazil permanently, they prefer it to going back to nothing. What if they refuse? Lucas shrugged. Then things get complicated. Very complicated. But that rarely happens. People usually choose survival. That night was the worst of Sabine's life. She fully understood her situation. She was being coerced into becoming a money mule for an international financial crime network. No rescue was coming. No one was looking for her, and she was in a country where she didn't know the laws, didn't speak the language, and had no allies. Even more terrifying, she realized that Lucas and his network had done this many times before. They had perfected the process of identifying, luring, capturing, and exploiting European victims. She was not the first, and she certainly would not be the last. For the first time since arriving in Brazil, Sabine began to plan her escape. But how could she escape when she was in unfamiliar territory, without documents, without money, and surrounded by people who saw her as a criminal asset? The 5th day dawned with Sabine Richter in a state of controlled panic. During her sleepless night, she had obsessively analyzed every detail of her situation, looking for any possibility of escape before Eduardo returned with documents she'd be forced to sign. The reality was devastating. No passport, no money. Lucas had kept her euros for safety, no knowledge of the local area, and no Portuguese language skills. Around 7 a.m., one of the women, Tia Maria, brought her the usual breakfast: strong coffee and fresh bread. But this time, Sabine paid attention to details she had ignored before. Maria carried an old cell phone that she kept in her apron pocket. More importantly, she had left the bedroom door ajar, something that hadn't happened since the first day. Sabine decided to try a different approach. Instead of acting like a terrified victim, she would try to gain some trust. When Maria returned to collect the empty plate, Sabine smiled and said, "Obrigada," thank you, in Portuguese, one of the few words she knew. Maria looked surprised but responded with a small nod. Encouraged, Sabine pointed to herself and said, "Sabine," then pointed questioningly at Maria. "Maria," the woman replied with a small smile. "Maria, Filhos?" Sabine tried in basic Portuguese, gesturing to indicate children. To her surprise, Maria replied in broken English, "Yes, 3 children. 2 girls, 1 boy." This small human connection gave Sabine an idea. Over the next few hours, she worked to establish some kind of relationship with Maria. She showed her photos of her own children that she had in her wallet. Lucas had returned only the wallet, keeping the passport and money. Maria showed her photos of her children on her old cell phone. "You, good mother," Sabine said in simplified English, pointing to the photos. "My mother too. Very sad, very afraid." Something in Maria's face changed. She looked at Sabine for a long moment, then glanced nervously at the door. "You don't tell Lucas," she whispered. And for the first time, Sabine saw compassion in her eyes. Around noon, Lucas appeared with formal business clothes, a blazer, pressed blouse and professional-looking pants. "You need to look respectable," he announced. "Eduardo arrives tomorrow morning with the documents." "Please, Lucas," Sabine tried to appeal to whatever humanity might remain in him. "You have a family. How would you feel if someone did this to your sister?" "My sister isn't stupid enough to travel alone to Brazil trusting strangers on Facebook," Lucas replied coldly. "You make stupid choices. You bear the consequences." But when Lucas left, Sabine noticed that he hadn't locked the door completely. There was a small crack. It was the first time in 5 days that this had happened. Coincidence? Or maybe Maria had said something. Around 2 p.m., Sabine heard several male voices downstairs, including a heated argument between Lucas and another man. She could make out a few words in English: police, asking questions, and German embassy. Her heart raced. Could it be that someone was looking for her? Maybe her children had become worried. Or perhaps the German police had discovered the scheme. At 3 p.m., something unexpected happened. Maria rushed into the room, glanced nervously behind her, and then whispered urgently in broken English, "You run now. Lucas gone. Police may be coming. Trouble for you if you stay." "Where to?" Sabine whispered back. Maria pointed to the window. "Road there. Walk to big church, Igreja de São Francisco. Find police. Tell them you lost. Say tourist lost." "My passport?" "No passport. Just run now. If you stay, very bad for you." The urgency in Maria's voice was real. Maria then did something Sabine would never forget. She took money from her own pocket, about 100 reis, and pressed it into Sabine's hand. "For taxi. For food. Go now." Without thinking twice, Sabine said a quick "obrigada" to Maria and headed for the window. The bars she had thought were for her safety actually had a loose section. Maria had worked to loosen them over the past day. From the second floor, there was a steep but possible descent across the roof of an adjacent building. Sabine, despite her 52 years and paralyzing fear, found a strength she didn't know she possessed. She managed to climb down from the roof into a narrow alley behind the house. She could hear male voices arguing inside the house, but she couldn't tell if they had noticed her escape. Following Maria's instructions, she walked quickly toward what appeared to be the church tower she could see in the distance. The walk took about 25 minutes. She tried not to run, not to attract attention, but her heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Several times she thought she heard motorcycles behind her and ducked into doorways or shops. Finally, she saw it, the Igreja de São Francisco, a beautiful colonial church in the town center. And parked in front of it, like an answer to a prayer, was a police car. 2 uniformed officers were talking to an elderly man. "Police, help me." "Policia," she shouted in a mixture of German, English and Portuguese, running toward them. The officers turned around, surprised. "Turista?" one of them asked. "German." "Alma," Sabine said, her voice breaking. "Kidnapped. Sequestro. Help. Ajuda." What she didn't know was that at that very moment, an international investigation was already underway. The German Foreign Ministry had been alerted by Thomas, her son, who had become worried when she didn't respond to messages for 3 days, unusual for his mother. The German embassy in Brasilia had contacted Brazilian federal police about a pattern of disappearances linked to Facebook groups targeting vulnerable German women. Her escape had not only come at the right time for her, it had come at the perfect moment to expose the entire criminal network that had been operating for years across several Brazilian states. Sabine Richter's rescue on the afternoon of April 19 triggered one of the largest anti-fraud and organized crime operations in Brazil's recent history. What began as the case of a lost German tourist quickly turned into an international investigation that would uncover a vast network of corruption, money laundering and human trafficking spanning 3 continents.